The innocent child was taken into the woods by his stepfather to play. At the end of the day, only the stepfather came back, looking terrified, and the child was missing. What terrible thing had happened? "Did he leave you alone again?" asked Alicia, her older sister, as she placed a steaming cup of coffee in front of Madeline. The small, humble kitchen in their mother's house had become Madeline's sanctuary, a place where she could let down the mask of strength she wore every day. Madeline nodded, her gaze falling sadly on her son Junior, who was playing with a small plastic car on the floor. "He promised me this time would be different," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "But he left again. No calls. Nothing. It's like he was never even there." Alicia sighed, knowing all too well the story. The man who had promised love and security to her sister had vanished like a mirage, leaving Madeline alone with a baby in her arms and a mountain of problems to deal with. "So, what are you going to do now, Julie? You can't just keep waiting for him." "I'm not waiting for him," Madeline said, sitting up straighter, a note of determination in her voice. "I have to think about Junior. He's my priority now." Her words were firm, but her eyes betrayed the fear and uncertainty that gnawed at her. From the day she left the hospital with Junior in her arms, Madeline had felt the weight of the world on her shoulders. Every penny had to be counted carefully, every expense measured and justified. The jobs she could find were temporary and poorly paid, and often she had to rely on her family's help just to have a roof over her head and food on the table. But she never let herself falter in front of Junior. For him, she always had a smile and a word of encouragement. Max, the mixed-breed dog she had taken in off the streets before meeting Junior's father, had become her only loyal companion. When life became unbearable and the nights seemed endless, Max would curl up beside her, offering the silent comfort only an animal can give. Junior adored him, and Madeline found a bit of peace watching how Max and her son communicated without words. One morning, while preparing breakfast with the little she had, Madeline felt a dark shadow clouding her heart. It was Junior's check-up day, and although it wasn't the first time she was taking him to the doctor, something inside her told her to stay alert. But life didn't give her a break from her worries. She needed to find a job, a stable one, to move forward and give her son a better life. That very day, as she walked down the main street of their neighborhood with Junior in one hand and Max trailing behind, Madeline stopped in front of a second-hand clothing store. A sign in the window caught her eye. "Help wanted." She looked down at Junior, then at the sign, hesitating for a moment. "Mommy's just going to ask something, okay?" she said, and Junior nodded, clutching the toy car he always carried with him. Inside, the store was crowded with clothes on racks and shelves full of shoes and accessories. An older woman, her grey hair tied in a bun and thick glasses perched on her nose, watched her curiously from behind the counter. "What are you looking for, dear?" the woman asked, her voice rough but kind. "I saw the sign in the window," Madeline replied, trying to sound confident. "I'm looking for work. I'm hardworking, and I can do anything you need." The woman looked her up and down, evaluating her modest but dignified appearance. "Do you have any experience?" "I've done a bit of everything," Madeline admitted. "Cleaning, cooking, childcare. I learn fast." The woman nodded slowly as if weighing her words. "All right," she said at last. "Come tomorrow at 8. The pay isn't much, but it's something." Madeline felt a wave of relief wash over her. "Thank you," she said sincerely, and she left the store with a small spark of hope in her heart. That night, as she stroked Max's fur and listened to Junior's soft breathing as he slept, Madeline thought about the day ahead. It wouldn't be easy. Nothing in her life ever had been. But now, she had a job, even if it was a modest one, and that was a step in the right direction. All she needed was a chance, a small break to get back on her feet and fight for her son. Jackson came into Madeline's life almost like a miracle. It was one of those long days at the store where everything seemed to be painted in unrelenting shades of grey. Madeline had finished her shift and was exhausted, scraping together the last bits of energy to get home with Junior and Max. That's when he appeared, with an easy smile and eyes that seemed to see beyond Madeline's tired facade. "Need help with that?" he offered, gesturing to the bags Madeline was struggling to carry. She, always wary of unexpected kindness, hesitated for a moment before accepting. "Thanks," she murmured, handing him one of the heavier bags. She walked beside him in silence, fully aware of his presence, wondering who this man was that had appeared out of nowhere. Jackson introduced himself as a new neighbor, someone who had moved into the area looking for a quieter life. He had a way of talking that put people at ease, and despite her reservations, Madeline couldn't help but feel intrigued by him. Over the next few weeks, Jackson found reasons to stop by the store, always with a smile, always with a kind word. Little by little, Madeline began to let her guard down. Jackson didn't just help her with the bags. He also brought small gifts for Junior, like candy or a little toy car. "I don't want you to think I'm overstepping," he'd say, "but I saw this and thought of him." Madeline, who had never had anyone outside of her family and Max to lean on, started to see a light in Jackson that she hadn't felt in a long time. It was slow, like a river rising after a steady rain. Jackson gradually earned her trust, showing patience and understanding. He never pressured her, never made her feel bad for being cautious at first. He was just there, with his smile and kindness, offering her a shoulder to lean on. One afternoon, as they were walking through the park with Junior running ahead and Max trotting beside them, Jackson took Madeline's hand. "I've been thinking," he said in that soft, sure voice she had come to associate with him. "Maybe we could try being something more. You, Junior, Max, and me. A family." The words surprised her. Not because she hadn't thought about it, but because a part of her was afraid this moment might never come. Madeline looked into his eyes, searching for any hint of dishonesty, something that might tell her this was all too good to be true. But she didn't find it. All she saw was sincerity and love? Maybe. "Jackson," she began, feeling her heart pounding in her chest. All of this, it's a big step." "I know," he replied, not letting go of her hand. "And I don't want to rush you. But I want you to know that I'm here for you. For both of you. I'm not perfect, but I want to try. I want us to have a chance." Madeline sighed, feeling the weight of the decision before her. It wasn't just about her. It was about Junior, too. But when she looked at Jackson and saw how he watched her son with a tenderness she had never seen in another man, something inside her softened. "All right," she finally said. "We can try." And so it began. Jackson became a constant presence in their lives, someone Madeline could depend on. He offered her support, stability, things she had longed for so long. To Junior, Jackson was like a new friend at first, someone who took him to the park and taught him how to throw a ball. Max, on the other hand, watched Jackson cautiously, as if he knew something that Madeline couldn't yet see. Things seemed to be going well, and when Madeline found out she was pregnant with Lucas, the son she would have with Jackson, she thought she was finally building the family she had always dreamed of. Jackson was thrilled with the news, and for a while, life seemed to be smiling on them. It was as if the sun had decided to shine a little longer on their small home. But sometimes the brightest light hides the darkest shadows. And although Madeline didn't know it then, those shadows would soon begin to stretch, threatening to swallow everything she had worked so hard to build. Max, her faithful companion for years, had been acting uneasy since Jackson's arrival. At first, Madeline thought he just needed time to adjust to the new family dynamic. Max had always been a calm, protective dog, but since Jackson moved into their lives, his behavior had changed. Often, Max would position himself between Jackson and the kids, growling softly, as if he sensed something Madeline couldn't see. "He's just a dog, Madeline," Jackson would say with a forced smile. He's probably just jealous because he's not the center of attention anymore. Madeline wanted to believe him, wanted to think that Max just needed time to adjust. But there was something about the way the dog looked at Jackson, the way he stayed alert whenever he was near, that tied a knot in her stomach. One night, as Madeline was preparing dinner, she heard Max barking furiously in the backyard. She peeked out the window and saw Jackson, with a tense expression, trying to calm the dog. "Stop it, Max! Shut up!" Jackson shouted, but Max wouldn't quiet down. Jackson glanced up, noticing Madeline watching from the window, and immediately softened his tone. "He's just upset over nothing, babe. Don't worry, I'll calm him down." That was the first time Madeline felt a pang of doubt. There was something in Jackson's voice, the way he looked at Max, that sent a chill down her spine. But she said nothing. She didn't want to question the man who had become her rock, the father of her children. She forced herself to push those thoughts aside, to ignore the intuition that was telling her something wasn't right. Then, one day, Max disappeared. Madeline noticed immediately. The dog always waited by the door every morning, wagging his tail happily. But that morning the house was silent. "Jackson, have you seen Max?" she asked, trying to keep her voice calm. Jackson shrugged, not looking up from his newspaper. "No, I haven't seen him since last night. Maybe he ran off." Madeline felt a pit in her stomach. Max never left the house. She ran out to the yard, calling out for her dog in desperation. "Max! Max!" Her voice echoed into the cold morning air, but there was no answer. She combed through the neighborhood, asked the neighbors, even called the animal shelters, but no one had seen Max. It was like he had vanished into thin air. "I'm sorry, babe," Jackson said later with a sympathetic expression. "Sometimes dogs just leave. Maybe he got tired of being here." Madeline felt a wave of sadness wash over her. Max had been her companion, her protector. The idea that he had left on his own didn't make sense. But what other explanation was there? Jackson seemed so understanding, so sure that Max had simply run away, that Madeline had no choice but to accept his version of events. Still, deep down, something kept telling her that things didn't add up. Life moved on. Jackson kept the family busy, being even more attentive to the kids, often taking Junior on walks through the woods, teaching him about nature and how to be brave. Madeline tried to convince herself that everything was fine, that Max was gone, and Jackson was the good, honest man she had always believed he was. But at night, when the house was quiet and she lay awake in bed, she thought of Max. She thought of those alert eyes, those barks she never fully understood. And that's when the shadows started to stretch. Jackson began to show a side of himself that Madeline hadn't seen before, an impatience with Junior that hadn't been there. The first time Madeline noticed this was one afternoon while they were in the kitchen. Junior, with his little hands, was trying to help her make dinner. The boy spilled some milk while trying to pour it into a glass, and Madeline was about to clean it up when Jackson stormed into the kitchen. "Look what you've done!" he shouted, his eyes flashing with a fury Madeline had never seen before. Junior shrank back, his eyes wide with fear, as if he knew something had changed. "Jackson, it was an accident," Madeline said, her voice shaking as she tried to stay calm. "He was just trying to help." "It's always an accident with this kid," Jackson snapped, not taking his eyes off Junior. "It's time he learns to do things right." Madeline froze, unsure how to respond. She had never seen that look on Jackson's face before. It was as if a mask had fallen, revealing something dark and threatening underneath. Junior said nothing, his gaze fixed on the floor, trembling slightly. After that incident, the atmosphere in the house changed. Jackson became more strict with Junior, pointing out every mistake, every little slip-up as if they were personal offenses. The tension in the air was thick, and Madeline felt like she was walking on thin ice, afraid that one wrong move could make everything crumble. "What's going on with you?" she asked one day, as Jackson sat on the couch watching Junior with a cold stare. "He's just a kid, Jackson. Why are you being so hard on him?" Jackson turned to her slowly, his eyes darkened with an emotion Madeline couldn't quite place. "This kid needs discipline," he said in a low, controlled voice. "I can't let him grow up to be useless. And if you're not going to do it, then I will." Madeline felt a lump in her throat. "He's just a child," she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. But she knew her words fell on deaf ears. Somewhere deep and dark inside, Jackson had decided that Junior was a burden, a problem that needed to be fixed or gotten rid of. As time passed, things only got worse. Every day was a silent battle, with Madeline trying to protect her son without provoking Jackson's anger. Junior became more withdrawn, his laughter and joy replaced by constant anxiety and fear. Madeline would hold him close at night, whispering that everything would be okay, even though she wasn't so sure herself. Eventually, Madeline realized she couldn't go on like this. One night, after Jackson had punished Junior for a small mistake, she made a decision. She couldn't let her son grow up under the control of a man who didn't love him. She had to leave. She had to find a way to protect Junior, even if it meant facing Jackson. "I want a divorce," she told Jackson one Sunday morning while he was reading the newspaper at the kitchen table. The words came out stronger than she expected, like a punch in the air. Jackson slowly lowered the paper, his eyes fixed on her with a coldness that made her shiver. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice dangerously low. "I want a divorce," Madeline repeated, feeling her heart race. "I can't live like this anymore. Junior deserves a better life, and so do I." Jackson stared at her in silence for a long moment. Then, a slow, cruel smile spread across his face. "And you think I'll just let you go that easily? You think you can take everything from me? My son, my home?" "Junior isn't your son," Madeline replied, feeling an unexpected surge of courage. "And I don't care what you say. I'm leaving, and I'm taking Junior with me." Jackson's smile vanished. "Try it," he said in a chilling voice. "Try to leave, and you'll see what happens. I'll keep Lucas, and you'll be nothing but a mother without her children." Madeline felt the room spin. The threat was clear, and Jackson would carry it out if she tried to leave. Her dream of escaping shattered in that moment, crushed by the weight of reality. She couldn't lose Lucas, but she also couldn't keep letting Junior suffer. The following weeks were agony. Jackson became even more controlling, watching her every move, every word. Madeline tried to keep the peace, to protect Junior while desperately searching for a way out. But every day became harder, every look from Jackson more threatening. The opportunity Jackson had been waiting for came on a cold, grey morning. Madeline, worried about Lucas's persistent cough, decided to take him to the doctor. Jackson offered to stay home with Junior, acting kinder and more helpful than usual. Madeline hesitated for a moment, her maternal instinct telling her it wasn't a good idea to leave Junior alone with Jackson. But the need to take Lucas to the doctor forced her to agree. "I'll be back soon," she told Junior as she said goodbye at the door. She hugged him tightly, whispering in his ear, "Be a good boy, okay?" Junior nodded, hugging her back. "Okay, Mom." His voice was calm, innocent, without the slightest suspicion of the danger that was coming. Jackson watched the scene from the kitchen, his eyes cold and calculating. He knew he had to act quickly, that this was the only chance he would get. When Madeline finally walked out the door, taking Lucas with her, Jackson turned to Junior with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Do you want to go to the woods?" he asked, trying to sound cheerful. "We could see some animals." Junior's eyes lit up. He had always loved the woods, and the thought of seeing animals filled him with excitement. "Yeah!" he exclaimed, not noticing the shadow that crossed Jackson's face for a brief moment. They packed a bag with some snacks and a bottle of water. Jackson took Junior's hand with an unusual gentleness, and together They headed down the path that led to the woods. The morning was calm, the air fresh and full of promises for little Junior. But as they walked deeper and deeper, the feeling of calm began to fade. "Where are the animals, Jackson?" Junior asked after a while, looking around curiously. "I don't see anything." "They're further in," Jackson replied, keeping his tone light. "You have to be patient, Junior. Animals hide when they hear noises." Junior frowned but kept walking. The woods grew denser with every step, branches cracking under their feet, and the sun barely managed to pierce through the thick leaves above. The boy gripped Jackson's hand a little tighter, not knowing that this was exactly what Jackson wanted. After walking for a while, they arrived at a clearing deep in the woods, a quiet, secluded spot where it seemed like time had stopped. Jackson looked around, satisfied with the location he had chosen. "This is it," he thought, keeping the malicious smile he felt inside from showing on his face. "Let's rest for a bit," he said, releasing Junior's hand and pulling the bottle of water and snacks from the bag. "You can eat something while we take a break." Junior sat down on the ground, his initial excitement now replaced by a slight unease. "When are we going to see the animals?" Junior asked, biting his lip nervously. "Soon," Jackson lied, offering him a sandwich. "But first, rest a little. We'll need energy to keep looking." The boy took the sandwich and started eating quietly, his eyes still scanning the surroundings. Jackson watched him with an indifferent expression, waiting for Junior to finish eating and feel comfortable enough to fall asleep. He had planned everything carefully, knowing he needed to be patient. After a few minutes, Junior laid down on the ground, using the backpack as a pillow. The walk and the food in his belly soon got the best of him. His eyelids grew heavy, and despite the strange feeling of unease, he drifted into a deep sleep. Jackson waited a few more minutes, making sure Junior was completely asleep before standing up. He watched him for a moment, a mix of relief and contempt crossing his face. "It's better this way," he told himself. "Better for everyone." Without making a sound, Jackson turned and began walking back down the trail they had come from. He didn't look back, didn't let the image of Junior sleeping alone in the woods linger in his mind. There was only one thing on his mind: getting out of there and back home before Madeline returned. As he walked away, the forest closed in around him, the silence returning as Jackson's footsteps faded into the distance. Junior was left there, alone, surrounded by the quiet of nature and the growing darkness that began to envelop the clearing in the woods. Junior woke up with a start, disoriented, his heart pounding in his chest. The dark forest surrounded him completely, and a cold he hadn't felt earlier crept through his clothes, making him shiver. He blinked, trying to remember where he was and why he was there alone. The last thing he remembered was Jackson sitting next to him, saying they would soon see the animals. "Jackson?" he called out in a shaky voice, turning his head in every direction. But only the echo of his voice and the soft murmur of the wind through the trees answered him. The feeling of fear started to grow in his chest, and tears began to fill his eyes. "Jackson, where are you?" he called out again, but once more, only silence and the sounds of the night replied. He struggled to his feet, his legs trembling, his stomach tied in a tight knot of fear. He looked around, but all he could see was the dark forest, the long shadows of the trees stretching out like sleeping giants. "I have to find him," he thought, trying to stay calm. "He wouldn't leave me here alone." He started walking, at first with unsure steps, then faster. He stumbled over roots and fallen branches, his hands scratched by the thorns of bushes. The forest seemed to close in on him, each shadow growing more menacing, each sound more unsettling. "Jackson!" he shouted again, his voice breaking with panic. "Jackson, help me!" But there was no answer, just the whisper of the wind and the crunching of branches beneath his feet. Junior kept walking, or rather running now, not knowing where he was going, only wanting to escape the darkness, the feeling of being lost and abandoned. The idea that Jackson had left him there, alone and helpless, started to creep into his mind, like a slow, painful poison. After what felt like hours, Junior collapsed to the ground, exhausted and out of breath. His legs could no longer carry him, and fear had completely consumed him. He curled up next to a tree, hugging his knees and sobbing quietly. The loneliness was like a heavy blanket covering him, and the cold seeped into his bones. "Mom?" he whispered, his voice broken. "Mom? Help me?" He thought of Madeline, of her smile and how she always hugged him tight when he was scared. He thought about how she always protected him, how she always knew what to do. "Mom will come," he told himself, trying to find comfort in his own words. "She'll find me. I know she will." But as the minutes passed, the hope slowly faded. His stomach growled with hunger and his mouth was dry. Exhaustion overtook him and his eyes began to close despite the fear. "I have to be strong," he thought, repeating the words Madeline used to tell him. "I have to hold on until Mom comes." The night dragged on, slow and painful. Junior stayed curled up by the tree, shivering from the cold and with his heart full of fear. Every sound in the darkness made him jump, and every time he closed his eyes, he saw the image of Jackson walking away, leaving him behind. The first ray of sunlight that pierced through the leaves of the forest woke him up. His eyes opened slowly, and for a moment he didn't know where he was. But then reality hit him like a cold wave. He was alone, lost in the woods, and Jackson was nowhere to be found. Junior struggled to get up, his muscles sore from sleeping on the ground. He was hungry, really hungry, but there was nothing around him to eat. He looked around, trying to remember the path they had come down, but everything looked the same. Just trees and more trees. "I have to find the way out," he told himself. "I have to get back to Mom." He started walking again, this time more carefully, trying not to get more lost than he already was. Every step was hard, and every sound made him stop and look around in fear. The day dragged on, and the hope of finding a way out faded with each passing hour. Junior sat down on a rock, his empty stomach growling, and tears rolled down his dirty face. "Mom," he whispered again, his voice full of despair. "Please, find me." As night began to fall again, Junior curled up under a bush, hugging himself to stay warm. He didn't know how much longer he could hold on. He didn't know if his mom would find him. But deep down, he clung to a tiny spark of hope. The hope that somehow Madeline would come and take him back home. The darkness enveloped the forest once more, and Junior's fear grew with each shadow that moved among the trees. He tried to stay awake, fighting the exhaustion and cold that seeped into his bones. He was starving, his stomach protesting. But more than anything, he felt an overwhelming loneliness that made him want to scream, cry, and call out for his mom with all his might. He curled up tighter under the bush, trying to find some warmth. The night was quieter than the last, and every creak, every whisper of the wind through the branches made his heart race. He closed his eyes, imagining for a moment that he was in his bed, with his mom beside him and Max curled up at his feet. That's when he heard it. A bark, loud and clear, broke the silence of the night. Junior's eyes flew open and he held his breath. "Max," he whispered, almost not believing it. The bark came again, closer this time. Junior quickly sat up, his eyes scanning the darkness in desperation. And then, like a miracle, he saw him. The unmistakable figure of Max came through the trees, his eyes glowing in the dim light, his tail wagging happily. "Max!" Junior shouted, tears flooding his eyes. He ran toward the dog, stumbling over roots and branches, not caring about anything but reaching him. Max rushed toward him with the same enthusiasm, his body wriggling with joy as he circled Junior in quick, excited movements. Junior fell to his knees, wrapping his arms around Max in a tight, desperate hug. "I thought you were gone," he sobbed, burying his face in Max's soft fur. "I thought I'd never see you again." Max licked his face, comforting him in his own language of love and reassurance. It was as if he was saying, "I'm here. I won't leave you." The dog stayed close to Junior, his warm body providing the heat that the boy desperately needed, while Junior cried and laughed at the same time, relieved to not be alone in this terrifying place. After a few minutes, Junior managed to calm down. He stayed close to Max, feeling the dog's steady breathing. It was as though everything had changed with Max's arrival. The paralyzing fear he had felt was gone. He wasn't alone anymore. Max was there to protect him, to keep him safe. "We have to find our way back home," Junior murmured, stroking Max's head. "Can you help me?" Max wagged his tail, as if he completely understood what Junior was saying. He stood up, tail still wagging, and looked at the boy with those intelligent eyes that always seemed to know more than they let on. Junior stood up too, wobbling a little from exhaustion and hunger, but determined to follow Max. "Let's go," he said, trying to sound brave. "Let's go home." Max took off, and Junior followed closely behind. The dog moved confidently through the trees, as if he knew every corner of the forest. Junior watched him in awe, wondering how he had gotten there and how he knew exactly where to go. But he didn't ask any questions. He just trusted Max, trusted the connection they had always shared. The night was cold and dark, but Max's presence made it bearable. Every time Junior stumbled or fell behind, Max would come back, nudging him gently with his nose as if telling him not to give up. "I'm here with you," he seemed to say. "Keep going." As they moved on, the forest began to thin out, the trees spreading apart a little more, and Junior started to recognize some landmarks. They had been walking for hours, and though Junior was exhausted, the hope of getting home kept him going. He knew he had to keep moving, that he couldn't give up now. Max was leading the way, and with each step, the idea of seeing his mom again felt more real. Finally, just as the first light of dawn began to break through the sky, Junior saw something that made him stop. In the distance, through the trees, he could see the outline of the town, his home. Tears filled his eyes, and a shaky laugh escaped his lips. "We did it, Max," he exclaimed, looking at the dog with a mix of disbelief and joy. "We did it!" Max looked back at him, his eyes bright, his tail wagging as if he understood the significance of the moment. Junior ran forward, with Max by his side, and the closer they got to the town, the faster Junior's heart raced. When they finally reached the first houses, Junior stopped, breathless, his eyes scanning for someone familiar. And that's when he saw her. Madeline, standing at the entrance of her house, her face marked by worry and exhaustion, as though she hadn't slept in days. Their eyes met, and for a second, everything was still. "Mom!" Junior shouted with all his strength, running toward her. "Mom!" Madeline turned to him, and her eyes filled with tears as she saw her son running toward her with Max by his side. "Junior!" she cried, running to meet him. She wrapped him in a tight hug, so tight it seemed like she would never let him go. "My love, my baby." Junior clung to her, his small body trembling from the emotion and relief. "I thought I'd never see you again," he sobbed, burying his face in his mother's shoulder. "I thought you lost me." "Shh, my love," Madeline whispered, stroking his hair. "I'm here. I'll never let you go again." Max stayed by their side, his tail wagging gently, watching the scene with his eyes full of understanding. He had brought Junior home, safe and sound, and now everything was going to be okay. People from the town began to come out of their houses, watching the reunion with awe and emotion. "It's a miracle," exclaimed one woman. "The boy has come back." Junior held on to his mom, his body and heart exhausted, but filled with a peace he hadn't felt in days. He was home. He was with his mom. And Max, the loyal friend who had never left him, had been the hero who brought him back. The return of Junior and Max became the talk of the town. News spread like wildfire. People whispered to one another, telling how the lost boy had come home thanks to his faithful dog. But while the town marveled at what they saw as a miracle, Madeline had only one thing on her mind: finding the truth. Something in her son's story had sent a chill down her spine, and she knew there were questions that needed answers. Junior lay curled in her lap, tired but safe, as she stroked his hair with tenderness. "Mum," the boy murmured, looking up at Madeline with eyes that still held the fear he had experienced. "Jackson left me in the woods." Madeline felt her heart stop for a moment. "What did you say, my love?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady, though the fury and anguish were already bubbling inside her. "He took me to the woods," Junior explained, his voice shaky. "He said we were going to see animals, but then he left me there. I called for him, but he didn't come back." His words broke, and Madeline hugged him tighter, feeling her own body tremble. "And then Max showed up," Junior continued, his voice a little stronger as he spoke about his friend. "He found me and brought me home." Madeline closed her eyes, fighting back the tears. The image of her son, alone in the woods, scared and calling for Jackson, filled her with a pain and rage she had never felt before. "Thank God for Max," she thought, looking at the dog resting nearby, his eyes watchful as always. Just then, the door opened, and Jackson walked into the house. His face wore a mask of false concern, like an actor in a play he had rehearsed too many times. "What's going on here?" he asked, looking between Madeline and Junior. "Where have you been, Junior? You had us all worried." Madeline felt the anger flare inside her. She looked at Jackson with a coldness she had never shown before. "Junior says you left him in the woods," she said, her voice laced with venom, "that you took him there and abandoned him." Jackson blinked, surprised by the direct accusation. "What? That's ridiculous," he replied quickly, trying to sound offended. "Junior got lost. I looked for him everywhere. What are you saying, Madeline?" "I'm not saying anything," she shot back, standing up with Junior still in her arms. "He is." She pointed to her son, who was looking at Jackson with a mix of fear and defiance. Jackson turned toward Junior, trying to regain control of the situation. "Junior," he said softly, "you're confused. You got scared and ran off. I tried to find you, but you were hiding." "That's not true," Junior shouted, his voice loud and clear. "You left me there. You walked away and didn't come back." Jackson's face tightened, and for a brief moment, Madeline saw his true nature. The mask he always wore was beginning to crack. "You're making things up, kid," Jackson said, his voice harder now. "You're confused." Madeline stepped forward, her eyes locked on Jackson. "Confused?" she asked in a low, dangerous voice. "Is my son confused, or are you lying, Jackson?" "Enough," Jackson snapped, losing his composure. "I don't have to listen to these lies. I didn't leave him. He got lost." But before he could say another word, Max stood up and began barking furiously. His whole body was tense, his eyes locked on Jackson with an intensity that startled everyone in the room. Jackson took a step back, surprised by the dog's reaction. Madeline felt a chill run down her spine. Max had always been a calm dog, but now he was showing an aggression she had never seen in him before. It was as if Max understood what was happening, as if he knew Jackson was lying. "Why is he reacting like this, Jackson?" Madeline asked, her voice full of distrust. "Why is Max barking at you?" "I don't know," Jackson replied, clearly uncomfortable. "He's just a dog. What does it matter what he thinks?" "Max has always been able to read people," Madeline said, stepping closer. "And so can I. Now I know who you really are." Jackson opened his mouth to respond, but Max barked even louder, moving toward him. Madeline had never seen her dog act this way. It was as if Max was defending Junior, ready to confront Jackson for what he had done. The tension in the room was unbearable. Jackson looked at Max, then at Madeline, and finally at Junior, who was watching him with eyes full of pain and reproach. The pressure was building around him, like the weight of all his lies was crushing him. "You can't prove anything," Jackson muttered, but his voice was barely a whisper. "There's no proof," "I don't need proof," Madeline said coldly. "I just need to know the truth. And the truth is, you tried to get rid of my son." Her words hung in the air like a final verdict. Jackson stumbled, the control he had so desperately clung to slipping away. Finally, his shoulders slumped, and his gaze darkened. "Fine," he said quietly. "I did it. I left him there. I couldn't take it anymore." Madeline felt the ground fall out from under her. She had known the truth, but hearing him say it out loud was like a knife to her heart. "How could you?" she whispered, tears burning in her eyes. "How could you do that to a child?" Jackson didn't respond. He just stood there, defeated and exposed, while Madeline looked at him with a mixture of hatred and sorrow. Max stopped barking, but stayed close to Junior, his body still tense, ready to protect him if needed. The silence that followed Jackson's confession was thick and suffocating, as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. Madeline could barely process what she had just heard. Jackson's words echoed in her mind, each one a blow that left her breathless. But in the midst of the chaos, a sense of determination began to form inside her. She knew what she had to do. "Get out," Madeline said finally, her voice low but firm. "Leave before I make you—" Jackson looked up, shocked by the calm in her voice. "Madeline, you can't do this to me." "I already have," she interrupted, her voice colder than she had ever felt. "The only thing that matters to me is my children's safety. And you, Jackson, are a danger to them." Jackson seemed to shrink under her gaze. He knew he had no power over her anymore, that all the lies and manipulations he had used in the past had vanished the moment he admitted what he had done. Without saying another word, he turned and left the house, leaving Madeline and Junior embracing in the living room. It wasn't long before the sound of sirens filled the air. Someone in the town, maybe a neighbor who had heard the commotion, had called the police. Madeline watched from the window as Jackson was handcuffed and led to the patrol car. He didn't resist, didn't say a word. He let them take him away, his face expressionless, while the officers escorted him off the property. The following days were a mix of relief and chaos. Madeline had to give statements to the police, and Junior did too. The authorities handled everything, and Jackson's confession, along with Junior's testimony and the story of Max, provided more than enough evidence to ensure his arrest. Jackson was formally charged with child abandonment and animal cruelty, and he was taken to prison while the trial was being prepared. Madeline felt a weight lift from her shoulders when she finally knew that Jackson was behind bars. It was as if a knot that had been tightening in her chest for so long had finally come undone. She was free. For the first time in a long time, she could breathe without fear. The town rallied around her. Neighbors and friends came to her house, offering support and assistance. Some brought food, others offered to watch the kids while she dealt with the authorities. Madeline realized she wasn't alone. There was an entire community willing to help her rebuild her life. Max, for his part, became a local hero. The story of the dog who had saved Junior spread throughout the town, and everyone wanted to meet the brave animal who had defied the odds to bring the boy back home. But to Madeline and Junior, Max was more than a hero. He was family, a protector, and a loyal friend. Madeline focused on caring for her children and giving Junior the love and safety he needed to heal. The first few nights were tough. Junior had nightmares, and Madeline often found herself awake in the darkness, holding him and whispering that everything was okay, that they were safe. Max, always watchful, slept at the foot of the bed, ready to protect them if needed. Over time, the wounds began to heal. Junior started smiling again, laughing and playing like he used to. The fear that had once filled his eyes slowly faded, replaced by the joy of being a loved and protected child. Madeline watched the change and felt infinite gratitude toward Max, who had been the key to bringing her son home. One afternoon, while they were in the yard, Junior came up to Madeline with Max by his side. "Mum," he said, looking at the dog with a serious expression. I want Max to stay with us forever." Madeline smiled, kneeling down to hug her son. "Of course, my love," she replied. "Max is part of our family. He'll always be with us." Max wagged his tail, as if he understood Madeline's words. He leaned over and licked Junior's face, making him laugh, a sound that filled the air, one that Madeline would never tire of hearing. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Life for Madeline Jr. and Lucas settled into a calm, steady rhythm. There was peace in their home, a peace they hadn't known in a long time. Max had earned a permanent place in their hearts, and his presence was a constant reminder of loyalty and unconditional love. One afternoon, as Madeline watched her children play with Max in the garden, she realized that despite everything they had been through, they were okay. They had survived the storms, faced their fears, and come out stronger on the other side. Life had thrown them difficult challenges, but it had also given them the chance to rediscover what truly mattered: love, family, and the loyalty of a friend who never left them alone. Max ran around the kids, his tail wagging joyfully, his eyes full of life and energy. Madeline smiled, feeling a deep sense of peace. At last, after everything, they were where they were meant to be, together, safe, and ready for whatever came next. Because now they knew that as long as they had each other, they could overcome anything. The story of Madeline, Jr. and Max is a powerful tale of resilience and the fight for justice in the face of adversity. Throughout the narrative, we see Madeline confront the harsh reality of a toxic, manipulative marriage while fighting to protect her children. Her bravery in standing up to Jackson and seeking the truth showcases an impressive inner strength. Junior, with his innocence and courage, teaches us that even in the darkest moments, hope can lead us back to the light. The relationship with Max, the loyal dog who becomes the hero, adds a profound layer of humanity and compassion to the story. Max represents the unshakable loyalty and protective instinct that we often find in the most unexpected places. The journey of these characters leaves us with a clear lesson: true love and courage can overcome fear and evil. The story underscores the importance of trusting our instincts, the need to protect the innocent, and the power of family love to heal the deepest wounds. It reminds us that kindness and loyalty can be found even in the darkest times.